I always thought marriage was built on trust. When you choose someone, you stand by them, no matter what. At least, that's what I believed when I married Emily. 4 years, I convinced myself we were happy. Even when the small things started to feel off, when she stopped laughing at my jokes, when her late nights at work became more frequent, when the warmth in her eyes cooled into something distant, I ignored it. Love makes you blind, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that the woman I had built a life with was slipping away. The truth didn't hit me in some dramatic way. There was no hidden note, no accidental text message. It was something far more subtle, something I should have noticed sooner. One evening, she was packing an overnight bag, casually mentioning that she'd be spending the weekend at her friend Sarah's house. Her voice was steady, her actions routine. But I just knew. "You're staying with Sarah again?" I asked, keeping my tone even, though my chest tightened. She barely glanced at me. "Yeah. Just a girls' weekend." A lie. I could hear it in the way she over-explained, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to push, to demand honesty, but a realization settled over me like ice. If she wanted to lie, she would. And if she was lying, then something between us was already broken. So instead of arguing, instead of pleading, I did something that even surprised me. I smiled. "Have fun," I said, walking past her toward the kitchen. I didn't look back. I didn't try to see her reaction. Because at that moment, I knew, this wasn't my loss. It was hers. She had no idea what was coming, no clue that she had just set something in motion that she wouldn't be able to control. The second she walked out that door, something inside me shifted. I stood there in the silence of our kitchen, gripping the counter, staring at the empty space where she had just been. There was no outburst of anger, no gut-wrenching heartbreak. Just clarity. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to be the man she expected, the one who would sit at home, waiting for her to come back. No, I had different plans. Plans that would turn her world upside down. And the best part? She had no idea what was coming. That night, I didn't text her. I didn't call. I went about my evening as if nothing had changed. I cooked myself a steak, medium rare, just how I liked it, poured a drink, and settled in to watch TV without a single interruption. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The next morning, I woke up early, more refreshed than I had been in months. I knew exactly what I needed to do. While she was gone, I got to work. I spent the day sorting through finances, making quiet phone calls, and putting my plan into motion. If Emily was already halfway out of this marriage, then I was going to make sure she walked straight into a reality she hadn't anticipated. I imagined her coming home, expecting things to be the same. She'd walk through the door with that same detached air, maybe looking just a little guilty, but confident that I hadn't caught on. But she was in for a surprise. Because I wouldn't be there waiting with anger or accusations. No, I'd be waiting with something far worse, for her at least. Indifference. By the time the sun set, I had everything ready. The house was spotless, every detail in place. The air felt charged with anticipation, but I kept myself calm. I wasn't just preparing for her return. I was setting the stage for the moment she'd realize she had made the biggest mistake of her life. And then, just like clockwork, I heard the key turn in the lock. Emily stepped through the door, her suitcase rolling behind her. Her expression was neutral, like she expected to find me exactly as she had left me, waiting, unaware, maybe even a little sad. Instead, she found me relaxed, sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of bourbon in hand. I smiled. "Welcome back, Em. Did you have fun?" She hesitated, just for a second, before forcing a casual nod. "Yeah, it was nice. Sarah and I had a great time." A lie. But I didn't react. I simply took a sip of my drink and nodded. "That's nice." Silence stretched between us. She expected something different, a confrontation, an argument, some sign of anger. Instead, she got nothing. And the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable she became. I could see it in the way she shifted, the way she avoided eye contact, how her fingers gripped the handle of her suitcase just a little too tightly. Emily wasn't stupid. She could sense something was off. She just couldn't figure out what. "I'm gonna unpack," she muttered, heading toward the bedroom. I let her go. Let her think she was in the clear. Because what was coming next? That was something she'd never see coming. Over the next few days, I kept everything exactly the same. I greeted her like always, asked the usual questions about her day, and never once acted suspicious or accusatory. But something had shifted. I could see it in the way she looked at me, first with confusion, then with suspicion. She started watching me more closely, like she could feel something brewing beneath the surface but couldn't quite put her finger on it. Randomly, she'd ask, "Is everything okay?" Every time, I'd just smile and say, "Of course." That answer drove her crazy. Because deep down, she knew something was different. One night, as we lay in bed, she hesitated before speaking. "You've been acting weird lately." I glanced at her, pretending to be surprised. "Weird how?" She frowned. "I don't know, you're just different. You're not mad at me or anything, right?" That was it. She wasn't worried about me, she was worried about herself. I turned on my side, resting my head on my hand as I looked at her. "Why would I be mad, Emily?" She opened her mouth, then shut it again. She didn't have an answer. If she insisted too much, she might slip up. If she let it go, she'd be left with the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Either way, I had already won. That weekend she thought she had gotten away with? I had used that time wisely. I had started connecting the dots, checking our finances, reviewing phone records, looking back further than she ever expected me to. And what I found? It confirmed everything I already suspected. Hotel receipts, cash withdrawals, late-night text messages that were just vague enough to be incriminating. Emily thought she was in control, that she could keep playing this game until she was ready to leave on her own terms. What she didn't realize was that I had already decided how this story would end. So I let her think she had the upper hand. She started to relax again, convinced that I hadn't caught on. She went back to sneaking late-night texts when she thought I was asleep, leaving the house under the pretense of running errands, dressing just a little too nicely for coffee with the girls. And I let her. Because while she was out there, thinking she was untouchable, I was making sure every move she made was documented. She thought she was winning. She had no idea she was playing right into my hands. Emily was getting bold. Too bold. At first, she had been careful, watching me, checking to see if anything had changed. But when she found nothing, when I gave her no reason to believe I suspected a thing, she let her guard down completely. She started coming home later than usual, barely bothering to come up with excuses anymore. The little details she used to cover so well, her rehearsed explanations, her careful timing, started slipping. It was almost like she had convinced herself that she had already won. One night, she came home close to midnight, looking far too put together for a simple work event. I was sitting on the couch, casually scrolling through my phone when she walked in. She hesitated when she saw me awake, but quickly forced a smile. "Didn't think you'd still be up," she said, setting her purse down a little too carefully. I studied her for a moment before shrugging. "Just wasn't tired." She shifted awkwardly, waiting, expecting me to ask where she had been, to challenge her obvious lie. But I didn't. I just stretched, let out a casual yawn, and stood up. "I'm heading to bed," I said as I walked past her. She watched me go, and I could feel her confusion trailing behind me. She had expected a fight, an argument, maybe even accusations. Instead, she got nothing. And that's when I knew she was starting to panic. The next few days were almost comical. She started paying more attention to me, suddenly remembering she had a husband. She asked how my day was, offered to cook dinner, tried to start conversations like she actually cared. It was an act. She was fishing for information, trying to figure out if I had caught on, if I was starting to suspect anything. And I played along, letting her believe she was slowly regaining control. She thought she was fixing things. But in reality, she was walking straight into the trap I had set for her. The shift was small at first, barely noticeable, like a tiny crack in glass that would soon spread and shatter everything. Emily was getting nervous. I could see it in the way she carried herself. Her once unshakable confidence was slipping. She would glance at me longer than usual, searching for signs, trying to gauge if I knew something. And yet, I gave her nothing. No anger. No accusations. Just the same calm, steady presence I had always been. And that scared her more than anything. One morning, as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, she tapped her thumb anxiously against her phone screen, a nervous habit she had when she was overthinking. "You're quiet this morning," she said, forcing casualness into her tone. I sipped my coffee, looking at her with an easy smile. "Just thinking." Her expression tensed for a split second before she let out a small, forced laugh. "About what?" I leaned back in my chair, stretching slightly before meeting her gaze. "About us." She froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. The way her grip on her phone tightened, the way her breathing stalled. That was it, the moment she realized I might know something. She was scrambling for an answer, trying to figure out if this was a test, if I was leading her into a trap. "That's good, right?" she asked cautiously. I smiled again. "Yeah, it really is." She nodded slowly, trying to convince herself that I was clueless, that she still had control. And that's why she never saw what was coming next. That evening, I set the stage. I told her I had something special planned for us, that I wanted to take her out to dinner, just the two of us. She hesitated. She wasn't used to this kind of attention anymore. She had spent so much time investing in her double life that the idea of reconnecting with me felt foreign. But she agreed. After all, if she refused, that might look suspicious. She got dressed, did her makeup, put on the kind of effort she hadn't given in years. For a brief moment, she even looked like the woman I had married. The woman I had trusted. But I knew better now. The restaurant was perfect, elegant, intimate, the kind of place we used to go before everything changed. As we sat down, I watched her relax slightly, convincing herself that whatever paranoia she had been feeling was misplaced. We talked. Small talk, nothing too deep. She laughed at my jokes again, reached for my hand like she used to. And the entire time, I was watching her, studying every flicker of emotion in her eyes. Then, just as she was about to take a sip of her wine, I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. She frowned, setting her glass down before looking at the screen. And in an instant, the color drained from her face. Because right there in front of her was everything. Screenshots of messages. Bank statements. Hotel receipts. Every single detail of her betrayal, laid out in front of her. Undeniable. Inescapable. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled, eyes darting from one piece of evidence to the next, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She looked up at me, her mouth opening, but no words came out. I leaned forward slightly, my expression calm. "You thought I didn't know, didn't you?" Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she finally spoke. "How long have you known?" I tilted my head, considering my answer. Then I smiled. "Long enough." Emily wasn't prepared for this. She had played out every possible scenario in her head, the fights, the screaming, the tears. Maybe she had even imagined me begging for an explanation, clinging to some desperate hope that we could fix things. But she never expected this. The version of me sitting across from her wasn't heartbroken, wasn't angry. I was calm. And that terrified her more than anything. She swallowed hard, still gripping my phone, still staring at the evidence. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked, her voice shaky. I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "Nothing." Her brows furrowed in confusion. "Nothing." I nodded. "That's right. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to argue. And I'm definitely not going to fight for someone who checked out of this marriage a long time ago." She looked like she wanted to say something, to argue, to spin some kind of excuse. But she knew it wouldn't work. The proof was right in front of her. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "I already took care of everything," I said, my tone even. "The accounts. The house. The paperwork. It's all done." She stiffened. "What do you mean, done?" I met her gaze, holding it steady. "I mean you wanted a way out, Emily. So I gave you one." And with that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't leave right away. Instead, I stood just outside, out of sight, letting her sit with it. Letting her feel the weight of the mess she had created. I imagined her staring at the screen, scrolling through the evidence over and over, trying to figure out where she had gone wrong. She had spent so much time weaving lies, building a separate life, believing she had everything under control. No. She was trapped in the very web she had spun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Right on cue. I let it ring a few times before answering. Yes. Her breath hitched on the other end. Where are you? I glanced through the window. She was still sitting at the table, gripping her phone like a lifeline. Her face was pale, her shoulders tense. Outside, I said simply. A pause. Then, her voice cracked. Please come back. There it was, the first crack in her armor. The realization that I wasn't playing by the rules she had expected. I let out a short laugh. Emily, don't insult me. Silence. I could picture her now, closing her eyes, trying to gather herself, searching for the right angle to take. She had always been good at manipulation, at twisting situations in her favor. But there was no strategy that could save her this time. Her voice wavered. We can fix this. Just let's talk. I leaned against the brick wall, staring at the night sky. Fix what, exactly? I asked. The months of lying. The nights you spent with someone else while I was at home trusting you? Or the fact that you weren't even planning to tell me the truth? A sharp inhale on the other end. It wasn't like that, she whispered. I exhaled slowly. Then tell me, Emily. What was it like? Silence. Then, finally, the truth I had been waiting for, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to hear her say it. I made a mistake, she admitted, barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes, letting those words settle. Not I'm sorry. Not I regret everything. Just I made a mistake. A phrase designed to minimize. To shift responsibility away from her and onto the abstract. Mistakes are things you fix, I said after a moment. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Over and over again. She let out a shaky breath. I cut her off before she could say anything else. You wanted a way out, Emily. So I gave you one. Take it. The silence stretched longer this time. I could almost hear her heartbeat through the phone. This wasn't how she thought this conversation would go. She had assumed I'd fight for her. That I'd beg for answers. Instead, I was the one closing the door in her face. Finally, her voice broke. Is this really it? I opened my eyes, staring at the city lights. Yeah, I said quietly. This is it. Then I hung up. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The moment I ended the call, something inside me shifted. Freedom. For months, maybe even years, I had been carrying the weight of a marriage that no longer existed. I had twisted myself into knots, trying to hold on to something that she had already let go of. But now, the weight was gone. I took one last look through the restaurant window. Emily was still sitting there, phone clutched in her hand, staring blankly at the screen. Her world had just collapsed. And for the first time, she had no control over what came next. That was her problem now. Not mine. I turned and walked down the street, breathing in the night air. The city felt different, brighter somehow. Like I was seeing it for the first time. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. By the time I got home, I had already made my decision. There was nothing left for me in that house. Nothing but the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. I had planned for this moment, and now all I had to do was follow through. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not because I was running away, but because I was walking toward something better. I had options, opportunities one had put off for too long. I had been too busy trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. But now, the storm had passed. I could finally move forward. As I zipped up my bag, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. We can fix this. Please, let's just talk. I stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled. She finally realized what she had lost. But it was too late. I had already moved on. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I deleted the message without responding, grabbed my bag, and stepped out the door. The future was waiting. And this time, it was mine to shape. And as I walked away, I felt nothing but peace. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.